And I wanted to make a video going over the biggest mistake that I made going into my IT and security interviews. And hopefully you can take away what you can do to improve on your next interviews and land that next job. So the biggest mistake that I made is kind of going to seem a little more general is not selling myself. And what I mean by not selling yourself is not going into the interview confidently speaking about the role that you're trying to get into. And then, more importantly, pulling out from your previous jobs that apply to that position that you're applying to so that they get an understanding that, oh, this person does in fact know what they're doing and can do this job. Maybe if you don't fit every single requirement in the listed job description, you're at least going to be able to confidently explain how you've done similar work in the past. So if they ask you a question, like technical question specifically, and you're able to confidently articulate using technical terms, and I want to emphasize that because I made the mistake going into a general IT position. Just to give you an example, I had an interviewer ask me, what is my experience and background in Active Directory and management? And I wasn't quite sure how to approach that question because I've been in Active Directory. I know how to create users, I know how to create policies, I know how to apply those policies to users, I know how to move them around within these operational units. But instead of explaining it in that way, I kind of froze up and I said, oh, well, I have some experience. I know there's like buckets in there and you got to drop them in the buckets. And I sounded like I was talking to my friend, and looking back at it now, it's like that's not how you need to approach an interview. And this person especially was a very older and more, he wasn't very joking type of person. So it was especially worse for me to not be able to articulate in a very technical way, which is what they were probably trying to get. And that's another thing that I want to emphasize on is when you go into an interview, you really need to read the interviewer, and you kind of need to get a feel for whether or not you can put in jokes and try to relate to the person, because relating to an interviewer can definitely put you into a positive position and leave the interviewer thinking, he might not have been the most technically sound person, but he knew enough, and I really liked his personality. Because at the end of the day, half of the point of the interview is to gauge whether or not you're a cultural fit. And it's an unfortunate reality, but if you're not going to mesh well with the team, because in any job, you're going to be working with somebody else or a handful of other people. There's always going to be this team mindset that you need to be able to fit into. So outside of just knowing technical knowledge, if you're not relating to the interviewer and not able to relate to the interviewer, and you can already tell very quickly whether the person is going to move you to the next step or if he's just trying to get through the interview. And that's kind of how that interview went with that Active Directory question, where I already knew 2-3 minutes in that, oh, this person is just now going through the motions and just to get this done, just to say they did get it done. I had a coworker who told me the same concept and principle, basically, is that when you go into an interview, you want to sell yourself in such a way that it's not necessarily lying, but it's painting a picture of yourself that expresses your interest and shows your knowledge of the jobs that they're going to require you to do. So if you go in there and you're not explaining coherently and technically using complete technical terms, don't say bucket like I did. Make sure you know the term that you're describing whenever they ask you a technical question. And if you don't, it's going to be blatantly obvious that you are faking it and not quite sure how to answer the question, and it's just a bad idea in general. So you need to prepare, because technical knowledge going into these is going to be half the battle, and then the other half of the battle is going to be reading the interviewer, trying to make it personable, and making yourself look like a very good fit culturally for this role as well. So it's like 50-50 here. So if you're the most technical person in the world, but if you're just a very unfriendly, unpersonable, not great to work with, they're not going to hire you, even if you are amazing at your job, because compared to somebody else who has a little bit less technical ability, they're just going to go for that person who's way more personable because they were able to teach the additional technical knowledge that they might need. So to give you an example that might make a little bit more sense on how to sell yourself, this is what I started to do as soon as I realized that I wasn't selling myself to the interviewers, where I had previously gone into the interview and just kind of been casually explaining concepts. It's like, oh, I've touched on that. I confidently went in and I said, I know how to do this. I know how to do this. I've done a lot of work in this. And I've done these tools, these tools, these tools. And that's been my primary role. And I emphasize that that's the bulk of what I had to do. So it wasn't just something that I touched on, but it was something that I had extensive experience with in my previous position. And so that set me apart. Whereas if I go in and say, oh, I kind of touched on it, and I sold myself in a way that seemed like I'm confidently able to do all these tasks and to learn the new software that is similar to this other software. I wasn't previously doing that. So when they would ask you a question, what's your experience with Active Directory? What's your experience with using this SIEM tool? What's your experience with using Splunk, for example? I would say, oh, I know how to do that because I've done logs, I've done operational units and policies, and it comes back to doing your homework, being prepared, looking at the interview requirements, and being able to go into the interview and explain confidently that I know how to do everything you've required in this list. So if I had to sum up how to get past making this biggest mistake that I made, is do your due diligence, look at the job description prior to the interview, look at all the tools, and really dial down and look at what tools you have had experience with, and then make sure you come prepared, practicing how to answer these questions and how to confidently articulate with technical terms your experience so that it seems like they need you in this role instead of you needing this job and how you kind of know what you're doing. So good luck out there. Make sure to like and subscribe if this was any help to anybody. Comment below if this helped you in your following interviews, and stay tuned for more. Thanks for watching.